Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about wisdom and how to access it. Alright, so I did a video. It was actually the first video I ever did for my channel, and the production quality is a little shoddy, so I'll just give you kind of a long story short on that video. I had figured out during the experiences that I had 6.5 and 7 years ago, where I was experiencing ego transcendence or non-dual awareness. And it was just a brief glimpse, but it was enough to make me realize that knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. So knowledge is something that you actually have to go and you look in a book and you read it, or you learn about it by actively trying to figure things out in the environment or learning something that's external from you. So that's what knowledge is. And wisdom, I had always kind of used interchangeably with that. And I always kind of thought, oh yeah, that's kind of the same thing, or maybe being wise just means you make good decisions and this and that and the other. And you know, oftentimes people will use wisdom in just common parlance in this way. But what I realized during my experience is that wisdom was this whole other thing. It was kind of like this living, breathing, ever-changing, subtle form of knowing that was always there with me and always speaking to me, whether I was receptive to it or not. And so during the experiences, I had likened it to a river. And so before, I had kind of, like, my ego was a dam to that river. So it was keeping that wisdom from flowing into my conscious mind because it was all stopped up by the dam of my idea of a separate self. So when I was having those experiences, I was able to pick up on so many different subtle things that I normally wouldn't. Like in a video that I did last week called What Enlightenment Is Not, I talked about an experience of these guys that I knew, and they had this little dog, and they'd always be talking to this dog, and like, you know, they would make up a voice for the dog, like a cutesy voice, and they would talk back and forth. And, you know, of course they realized that wasn't the dog's actual personality, but on a deep level they really thought that it was. And in viewing this, I got very sad, and I felt this deep emotion of sadness just well up over me because I realized that this is the way that human beings generally interact with one another. We project onto other people what we think is there, and then we interface with that projection instead of actually getting to know a person. And I mean, I think everybody is guilty of this for the most part. Maybe small children see people exactly as they are, but even that's kind of iffy. So these little bits of wisdom would just pop up to me, these subtle forms of knowing. And, you know, ever since that experience, I've been trying to get back to that same degree of wisdom. Like, how do I access that again? Like, what's the way that I can start to pick up on these little subtexts, this voice of wisdom that's constantly speaking, but somehow I can't hear it right now. Somehow I'm unconscious to it. And so the other day I was in the car and I was thinking about it, and I had remembered a comedy sketch that I had watched from Louis C.K., who's my favorite comedian. You know, very irreverent, but I really love his stuff. Like, he really thinks about things at a deep level. And he was talking about how if you watch the ocean, you can notice, like, you watch it for long enough, you start to understand how everything works. And I was just thinking about that, and it occurred to me that he was referring to the same form of knowing that I had experienced. And then I started to liken it to Vipassana meditation, where basically you're choosing a point of focus, and then you're focusing on that point of focus just as it is, and you're accepting it as it is, and that becomes your anchor for your concentration during the practice. And so this is also called insight meditation because insights are supposed to come up to this. And most of the time people use the sensation of the breath on the nostrils when doing Vipassana meditation. And so I had realized that there's this distinction between internal and external that's essentially false. And I knew this very, very well during those experiences, but I hadn't quite connected the dots up until the other day. All right, so one thing that was very, very evident to me is that I had repressed away a lot of different things. And I was saying, this is me, this isn't me. This is me, this isn't me. And in doing that, I was kind of making a lot of things as part of my personal shadow. If you're familiar with Jungian psychology, if you repress down traits or anything else, emotions inside of yourself, that becomes part of the shadow. And essentially, what I had done at that point in time was just that. And when you make something a part of your shadow, you cannot access the wisdom that's in it. And so the way to access wisdom is actually to reintegrate all of your traits. So the internal experience and the external experience, they were all just one thing. Like there's no separation between the emotions and thoughts that are occurring inside of you and all of the rest of reality outside of you, because essentially the realization of enlightenment or non-dual awareness is that there's nothing in reality that isn't you, and yet you're the container for that entire reality. And so your identification as this small self, as this person named Emerald or whatever your name is a false distinction that we've learned over the years. Now, as I've said, there's nothing in your reality that isn't you. And so the number one repression that anyone's ever done is when they're a newborn baby or maybe a 2 or 3 month old baby and they decide, I'm this separate person, and all this out here in nature, all this out in the environment isn't me. So basically that's the first repression that ever happens. Even before you say, oh, I like this trait and I don't like this trait, let me repress this away, or this trauma happened. The number one repression is always the repression of existence from yourself. And so because we have that distinction of internal and external, we start to disown aspects of reality. So whenever we disown traits that we don't like in ourselves, or whenever we make something separate from ourselves, we start to become dull and insensitive to the wisdom that's always speaking, because the voice of wisdom is constantly there, and it is even something that you would identify yourself with. It's just this knowing that seems to come from somewhere else other than yourself. Whenever you make that first primary distinction of this is me right here and that's everything else out there, that's what cuts you off from wisdom. So this was why during my experiences that I felt like I knew everything that I needed to know as a human being already, because I was connected to something that was omniscient and omnipotent. I was that thing. I was both part and whole of the reality that thing was. And so I already had access to all of these things. There was no need to figure anything out. I was already getting exactly what I needed. And I didn't need any more and I didn't need any less. And this is why I didn't need to seek things anymore. Like right now, I'm an active seeker. But at the time, everything kind of calmed down, and it was like I didn't need to figure anything out anymore. I didn't need to seek any more wisdom because it was already there. And it had always been there, constantly speaking to me all the time, but I had just been unreceptive to it. I couldn't accept reality as part of myself and didn't see it as part of myself. And so it was fully in shadow. And so when I became more aware of reality and when I became more aware of myself by extension, all of that wisdom just flowed in naturally. So if you notice, we think that, okay, well, my thoughts come from inside of my head, and this is kind of a taken for granted notion. But this is actually untrue. We don't actually know where our thoughts are. Our thoughts aren't really located anywhere. We could just say that we sort of experience them, that they occur in our head. That's just a belief and assumption of ours. Essentially, we could be thinking our thoughts from somewhere else. And actually, that's what during my experiences, my second one particularly, I called it thinking my thoughts outside of my head, because it felt like my thoughts were occurring somewhere way above my head. And basically, what was happening is that I was basically realizing that there was no separate sense of self. There was no difference between the internal me and the external everything else. And so in order to actually connect fully with our wisdom, we have to merge our concept of self with everything in existence. We have to realize that there is no distinction between ourself and everything else. And we have to allow ourselves to be what we are, which is everything. And this is hard to do because we make a lot of value judgments, not only about internal things like emotions that we don't like, we like to repress those away, or thoughts that come up that we're uncomfortable with, we like to repress those away. So we get really good about doing that, and our personality becomes really defined and refined and small. And I kind of liken this to like kind of cutting the floor out from under yourself as you begin to refine your personality as a teenager and adult. You know, you have a narrower and narrower self-concept, and so it cuts you off from that life-giving wisdom. And this is why adults are always so tired, because it comes with it a certain type of energy. And if you're so busy thinking, no, I have to be just this thing that I've cut myself out to be, and just this concept, then you're making yourself blind to the whole expansiveness of what you are. And so, in order to access your wisdom, you have to be willing to accept everything exactly as it is in your reality. So if you're somebody who has a very deliberate, definite kind of compartmentalized sense of self, you might experience life feeling a little bit dead to you. And it's because wisdom is a real living, breathing thing. It's not particular information that you find. It's not logical information. It's not knowledge. What it is, it's like this living, breathing, subtle form of knowing that's just imbued in all of your experiences. So this is all about being, allowing yourself to be 100% with reality as it is. Now this can be a little bit difficult because you want to say, oh goodness, you know, there are things in reality that I really don't like. You know, those things can't possibly be me. You know, there are serial killers out there. I'm not like them. Or there's this other thing going on in society that I don't like. There's war, there's corruption, there's greed. You know, and of course, on the mundane level, you want to make systematic efforts toward improving those things in society. But on the existential level, you have to notice that they are an extension of yourself. Everything in reality is. And so you have to be willing to accept everything as it is without the thought that reality should be any different than it is. Now, a way to practice this would be kind of like how Louis C.K. was saying in his thing. You just watch something and you watch it for long enough that you start to kind of like your distinction between yourself and that thing starts to kind of melt away, and you sort of merge with it. And when you're able to actually merge with it and feel at one with it, then you can access the wisdom that's inherent in that part of reality. And this is true whether it be an unpleasant emotion internally or some other thing in nature externally, because it's all nature. Even if it's an internal thing, if it's your emotions, it's nature. It's just like watching a thunderstorm. If you watch anger come up in you, that's a thunderstorm. Don't judge it as bad. Or you watch something out in nature like the ocean, or even like a busy highway can contain these patterns. Remember, there's nothing in reality that isn't you, and therefore there's nothing in reality that isn't divine. And so everything contains wisdom. Even the very things that you think of on a mundane level as very unpleasant and things that you would never want to be associated with, in order for you to get the wisdom from that, you have to at least accept that they're there. Now, on the mundane level, you can absolutely disagree with those type of things, and that's fine. But you have to, on an existential level, realize that there's no separation between yourself and anything else. And when you can truly merge with those things, that's when the wisdom comes. What you want to do, if you want to practice this, is you pick something internal or external to yourself, and you focus just on that thing, but you're going to focus on it only through one modality of your experience. So you can focus on it visually or tactily, like by touching it, or you can experience the sound of it, or you can experience even the taste or smell of it. Don't get involved too much with thought. I mean, unless you're going to watch thoughts themselves, but the thought would actually be the object of focus, and you're not going to want to not get caught up in what the thought's actually saying, not the content of the thought, but the sensation of the thought coming up. But those are the main 5 modalities, is the 5 senses. So pick one of those sensory experiences of the point of focus and just focus on it. Let it be as it is. Don't go into this experience seeking wisdom from it either, because then you want something from it. Then it's not accepting reality as it is, and it's kind of like you're this separate person trying to get something from something external to you. Instead, simply observe that thing as it is and let those boundaries between yourself and it melt away, and just allow it to be exactly it is. Don't want anything from it. Don't say this is good, this is bad. Don't place any assumptions or value judgments on top of it. Just focus on it exactly as it is. And so you don't want to go into these experiences trying to figure anything out. Again, you're just watching those things. You want what's true, whatever's true there. You know, you're not looking for anything, you're just being with reality exactly as it is. And if you can truly be with reality exactly as it is, and realize that everything in reality is an extension of yourself, then wisdom should come up naturally for you. So if I were to put a word onto what you're doing, is you're making yourself more receptive. You're emptying your cup of expectations and assumptions and value judgments, and you're just allowing that wisdom to just fill you up. You allow it into your experience and it'll flow through you, usually in the form of some kind of internal knowing or emotion, or you'll just have this sense that I know this thing. And I think it's very akin to intuition, and I didn't have anything where like I predicted the future, but it was all about just knowing what it was that I needed to know in the moment. You know, it wasn't about knowing more than anyone else. It was a very sort of utilitarian almost knowing. It gave me exactly what I needed to know at the moment in order to go where I needed to go. So, of course, this is very different from how we would normally go about looking at things. Normally, we're constantly making judgments. We're saying, oh, I like this, I like that. You know, maybe if I did this with this, it could work out well for me. Or, you know, normally we have kind of like a way of going about things where we look for what that thing can do for us. We're not interested necessarily in what's actually there. We're more so interested in the function that it provides for us. And so that type of function-based awareness, or that type of practical-based awareness for these types of merging experiments, have to kind of go on the back burner, and you have to just see things as they are. So that's how you access wisdom. And you find the more things that you're willing to invite into your self-concept and invite into your reality and become aware of, the more alive life will become. Because there's a certain energy that comes with this wisdom too, that otherwise gets completely drained out of you. Alright, well, that's all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and click the like button below and go ahead and subscribe. Also, if you're interested in other topics like this, like I have a lot more videos on enlightenment coming up. I also like to talk about various frameworks, like psychological frameworks, like Jungian psychology. I'm interested in alchemy, basically anything that relates to the human experience in a way that's like not so surface level, but really under the core kind of stuff. Like that's like what I'm really interested in, and you can expect all kinds of videos about that sort of thing from this channel. So if you're interested in those things, definitely subscribe. But other than that, that's all I have for you today, and until next time, keep becoming more you.